In this section of History 101, Lecture 1, Native America, we'll look at different points of view and perspectives of how Native Americans and Europeans viewed each other. The first concept we want to look at is European views of Native people when it comes to concepts such as freedom, liberty, and civilization. Initially, when Europeans began experiencing Native American cultures in the 16th century, some Europeans looked at Native Americans as free or truly free, in the sense that they had no lord or king ruling over them. When you study, European culture during the Middle Ages, a good chunk of the population are very poor or serfs. In other words, so low level in society that everyone's over them. They have a lord, they have the priest, they have the king, they have dukes and princes, and so some Europeans, when they encountered Native American people, they looked at their life and said, they don't have a lord, they don't have a king, they don't have somebody telling them what to do all the time necessarily, and so they viewed Native Americans as free. In other words, the social structure was different between Native American and European cultures. Other groups of Europeans, though, looked at that freedom, just like no structure, just kind of do whatever you want. Others viewed that lack of civilization as meaning Native Americans weren't truly free. In other words, you can't be free if you are outside of some type of social structure, or to put it another way, as I have here on this slide, you can't maintain freedom in an anarchy. Your freedom is based on some type of security. In an anarchic society, you don't have, there's no sense of security, and so one could argue you're not really free. So for a lot of Europeans, when they looked at themselves, they defined themselves as civilized. And so if you imagine making a checklist of, what is civilization or what is civilized, and then you make a list. For Europeans in the Middle Ages, it just so happened that the list they made of what constitutes somebody being civilized, they just haven't met all the items, right? You look at European culture, and everything European is a mark of civilization. A mark of civilization, or an example of this is proof or evidence of that we're civilized. And then when Europeans encounter Native American groups, and you go through that checklist, and you say, well, you don't have this, you don't have that, you don't build Gothic cathedrals, you don't build large cities with horses and carts and Gothic cathedrals and ships with cannons on them. You don't have these highly structured societies with a king and dukes and princes and a hierarchical religion with a pope and cardinals and bishops and priests. And, there's not the same level of structure in government and religion and society. And so for Europeans, all that order, all those social orders, religious, political, economic, was evidence of your civilization. So some Europeans, when they met Native American groups, said, well, you don't have this, so therefore you're not civilized. And so kind of how you define freedom. Can you be free outside of a social order? Can you exercise your freedom within a social order? And so Europeans kind of debated that and kind of where you fit in. As we get into the 18th century, another idea about Native Americans developed called the noble savage. This view of Native Americans developed as the Enlightenment philosophers and thinkers in 18th century Europe started looking at the world more philosophically, in some ways scientifically. Some Europeans started to look at Native Americans and how do they fit into this Enlightenment structure of society. So the idea of the noble savage developed. This idea was the idea that Native Americans are, to put it in a weird way, I guess, Native Americans are Europeans just without civilization. They're man in nature. In other words, what would human beings look like if they had no marks of civilization? That checklist. If they had no, idea, they had no civilized ideas, or if they didn't fit that checklist that Europeans created for themselves, there'd be Native Americans. And so, so the idea that, they're noble in that, just like, they're rational. Enlightenment thinkers argued mankind, human beings, were rational in nature, had rights, they're just people who haven't been civilized yet. And so so they're noble in that they're human beings, they're rational, they're, they have rights. John Locke, born with rights. They have these things. It's just, what do they lack? They're savages in that they don't have that. They don't have the marks of civilization. They don't fit that checklist that we've created and we run through. Oh, you don't have this. You don't have that. You don't have that. You don't have that. Therefore, you're not civilized. To put it in a religious context, the idea of noble savage kind of gets back to this idea that Native Americans were man in paradise, or what Adam and Eve would be. And so you connect this idea of the noble savage. They're noble. It's like Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were Native Americans. Adam and Eve they lived in nature without civilization. And so Native Americans are in this idea, are kind of an example of that idea of, it's Adam and Eve. They're man in nature. They're what man looks like without civilization. They're man in paradise. What mankind looks like in paradise. And so that's an interesting idea that developed in the 18th century. Negative images of Indians came about, as I kind of already mentioned. Negative images of Indians came about as, again, you have Europeans defining what civilized is. And so, what makes you civilized? And, it just so happens, since Europeans are making the list, it just so happens that Europeans are the most civilized. You kind of go, well, I think I'm civilized because of A, B, C, and D. We have highly structured government, king and dukes and lords, and highly structured economy, a highly structured religion, a pope, and cardinals and bishops and priests. You have large cities with Gothic cathedrals, ships with cannons on them. We wear a lot of clothes. We use metal, metal tools, metal unit armor, knights and all that. And so you go down that list and you go, well, it's just so happens we're the most civilized. And so again, those marks of civilization, you start going out as you go into the world. You look at other cultures. Well, you don't fit that definition. Therefore, you are not civilized. And so you start having negative images. That's where kind of the negative images come from. Is you define yourself as civilized. So if they don't meet, if person A over here doesn't meet that definition, they're not civilized. From the European point of view, Native Americans use the land correctly, and so for Middle Ages Europeans, the correct use of land is you fence it off and you develop it. You turn it into a farm. You turn it into a village. You build roads. You trade. And so, meeting Native American tribes, for a lot of Europeans, what justified European expansion into the New World is the land isn't being used correctly. And correctly meaning, fencing it off, building farms, building villages, roads, and all that. The other thing is, generally, when Native Americans met Europeans, generally the very first conversation revolved around land. For Europeans in the Middle Ages, you are supposed to pay for land. You're supposed to pay money to some type of regulatory body, king, knight, a lord. You're supposed to pay money and buy the land in some type of transaction. Buying the land, or paying for it, gives you a legal title, a deed or a title to that land, and it's yours. And so the issue is when a lot of Europeans came to America, that first conversation goes, we're interested in land. We'd like to pay for it. How much is the land? Well, when Native American groups say nothing, to a European that means, well, it's not yours then. You didn't pay for it. You don't have a legal document to the land. And so for a lot of Europeans, the fact that the land wasn't paid for in some type of monetary transaction to a regulatory body like a king, and also there's no legal document for a title, which Europeans are used to. And for a lot of Europeans, that meant the land was open or free. It's okay to live here and move here because we're paying for the land. There are numerous instances of of Europeans paying for the land. The most famous example being Manhattan, which is controversial because modern day people, we argue that they didn't pay enough for the land. It was like 24 pieces of seashells or whatever, but and so that that gets into different interpretations about what paying for the land is, or also what does that mean? For a European, paying for the land means I live here, you can't, you have to move. For a lot of Native American groups, initially at least, the idea of the land is no longer yours because you got something of value back. Now you have to move. Was a foreign idea. Was not in vogue, I guess you could say. Not an idea most Native Americans had initially. So that's going to lead to a lot of the conflict later. There's a variety of Native American responses to European expansion, and I think this is important because I believe my point or argument is that a lot of modern day history about Native American European interaction is overly simplistic, one-sided, and lacks perspective. And that's one reason why I think history is boring to students. History is boring to students because it's presented to them as a one-sided black and white morality play. The good guys, the bad guys, and and so it gets really boring. And so I think that's one reason why students find history boring. What my goal as a history instructor is to get students to look into a little deeper than the popular history. The popular history is often distorted or wrong or lacks context and perspective. And so what makes history a lot more interesting with Native American European interaction is studying the complexity of the relationship between Europeans and Native American reactions from over 4 centuries, the 15th to the 19th century. It's a good 4 centuries over 2 massive continents. Of course, there's a variety of responses and interactions. Some tribes allied with the Europeans to fight other Native American tribes they didn't like. The most famous example is Cortez in Mexico. When Cortez landed in Mexico, dozens of Native American tribes surrounding the Aztecs helped Cortez overthrow the Aztecs. The mythical miracle story that sometimes gets told of Cortez in 30 men in a cannon conquer the mighty Aztec Empire. Well, one argument is how great is that empire if 30 guys with 1 cannon can overthrow you? How great is your empire really? And so when you get into the study of it and you see, well, tens of thousands of non-Aztec Native Americans helped overthrow the Aztec Empire. So some used European expansion to get rid of Native tribes they didn't like. Many Native American tribes traded with Europeans. The most famous examples for North America are the Huron and the Iroquois. Many Native American tribes resisted European expansion. Maya, Inca, Cherokee, Sioux, Apache. It's outside of our class, but when you get to the 1880s, the Indian Wars of the 1870s and 80s, that's the famous Sioux and Apache in Europe, and the Shoshone, the Maya, Inca anciently in the 15th century. Some Native American tribes, decided to play the game, participate in European diplomacy. The Iroquois and the Huron are the most famous examples of that, and we'll talk about them when we get to the 1760s. The Iroquois and the Huron being rival tribes to each other. The Iroquois sided with the British, the Huron sided with the French, two European rivals, and so adapted to European expansion by participating in European diplomacy. Other tribes didn't strongly resist European expansion, either because they couldn't or other tribes were doing it for them. In the Southwest, Navajo, Hopi, and Paiute generally depended on stronger tribes like the Shoshone and the Apache to resist European or, by their time period, American expansion west. Land and property. This is probably one of the biggest issues with the popular narrative on Native American and European expansion. It is sometimes taught to students, and it's incorrect, that Native Americans had no concept of property ownership or land ownership, and that's simply incorrect. It's not. That's Now, Native American tribes or groups did not have European understandings of land and property ownership, but they definitely understood the idea of, the land being theirs. The popular romantic history romanticizes Native Americans to the point of not being accurate. For example, I was watching a video, in considering videos to show for my summer classes, I watched a YouTube video, and right out of the gate, this romanticized, incorrect, inaccurate history, and I can show the video. But anyways, so tribes had an understanding that the land was theirs in several ways. Number one, Native American tribes fought over the use of hunting and fishing grounds before Europeans came. They understood that for our tribe, this is our hunting and fishing grounds, and they fought other tribes who encroached upon them. The most famous example being the Iroquois and the Huron. The Iroquois and the Huron lived in the Ohio River Valley, Great Lakes region, constantly fought over hunting and fishing grounds. Many Native American tribes resisted European expansion into their land. If Native Americans had no concept of the land as ours when Europeans came and moved in, they would have moved. They would have said, well, yeah, you're right, the land isn't ours, okay, we'll move. There's some concept that we live here. And so, that the Aztec, this is our area, we live here. We in some ways, we dominate in some ways other tribes. This is our area. And so when Cortez and other Native American tribes tried to overthrow the Aztec, they resisted. Why? Because they did have views of land ownership. This is ours, we live here. And like I mentioned a minute ago, tribes viewed hunting and fishing grounds as their tribal land. This is our area. Okay. The biggest difference between European and Native American land ownership is the idea of private or communal. So, for example, a Native American individual would not have said, okay, This area is my personal hunting ground and fishing ground. No one else can hunt and fish here unless I allow it. Right? Hunting and fishing grounds were tribal. Everyone in the tribe could hunt and fish in the region. You're not going to see. You would never see a Native American going, okay, this is my little area. No one else can hunt and fish there. Native American concepts of land and property are more communal than individual. Whereas for Europeans, when I buy this land, I have a legal document to it, and I have put a fence up. It's mine. You can't come across this fence. And the biggest example, perhaps, of that conflict is when you get to the English colonies in the 17th and 18th century. In the 17th, 18th century, your British colonies, that's an issue. A lot of Indian colonial American conflicts began with, an American colonist going, "This is my land. I put a fence up. These are my crops. No one else can have them." Well, you have a Native American going, "Well, this fence doesn't mean this. I can go over this fence. I can get the ear of corn or whatever's growing and eat it, right? Or I can hunt on this land. This fence doesn't mean I can't hunt on this land." From a European point of view, yes, you can't cross that fence. So a lot of European Native American conflict arises over just that idea of, for a European, this fence means you can't cross it. For a Native American, it's not that cut and dried. If my deer goes onto your land, I'm going to follow it and kill it. Or there's crops growing here, I'm hungry, I will eat these crops. You don't necessarily view it as stealing. I'm eating. From a European point of view, it's mine, you're stealing. And so you have conflict arising from that misunderstanding. So for a lot of Native American tribes, the biggest issue is just, again, how do you regulate private land use? For Native American tribes, there's no concept of regulating private land. For Europeans, there is. For a lot of Native American tribes, there's not a monetary value to that land. And so that leads to the conflict. Again, for Europeans, the example is, okay, in Europe, what do we do in Europe? We pay for the land to some regulatory body. We get a legal document saying the land is ours. We put up a fence. And so again, also in Europe, for a lot of Europeans when they came to the New World, that was the first conversation. There's many examples of Europeans saying, okay, how much is this land? We will pay you for it. Well, you're talking to people that don't have any concept of paying something of value so that I can, keep this part of land. And so when a European asks you, how much did you pay for the land? And you say nothing. And then the next question is, do you have a legal title to this land? Well, no. For Europeans, that means the land is free. Land's open and free. We can move here. Without understanding that, for the native group, they don't understand it that way. For Native Americans, the fact that we live here, this is what makes the land ours is, well, we live hunt and fish here. This is, and so without need for paying money for it or having some type of regulatory body, hand out legal documents. Where's your legal document? Where's your legal document? Okay. There's a lot of examples of Native European cooperating or maintaining the peace. Iroquois and the British, Huron and the French in North America. And so the bottom line argument for me is when we discuss Native American-European interaction, what I want to get across to students is that there's a lot more complexity to the current narrative. And there's a lot of other things other than just conflict with Native American European interaction. And so for you as a student, I encourage students to get beyond the popular narrative which overly simplifies Native American European interaction across two large continents over 400 years of time.